Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Jennifer Smith, Director of Government Relations for MASB. With me is the rest of your Government Relations team, DeShandre Bedingfield, our Policy Analyst and Grassroots Coordinator, and Jeff Cobb, our Assistant Director of Government Relations. They are going to help with the chat, with technical issues, and helping you all stay muted. We do ask that everyone stay muted to cut down on background noise. Put any questions you have into the chat as we go. Today, we're here to talk about the Michigan Blueprint for Comprehensive Student Recovery that was issued by the Student Recovery Advisory Council on May 19th. And we're joined today by Brandy Johnson, former policy advisor to the governor and now special advisor on the governor's 60 by 30 initiative. Mary Gabara from Okemos Public Schools, Holly Spencer from Elk Rapids Schools, and Jan Van Gass from Norway Vulcan Area Schools. And the three of those board members served on this council, and they each served on different subcommittees within the council. So we brought them here today to talk about the blueprint. We're going to have Brandy kick it off by sort of giving us an overview, and then we'll hear from the board members about their experiences and their thoughts. And as I said, put any questions you have in the chat, and we will ask them as we go through the process. And right now, I'm going to turn it over to Brandy.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks everyone for joining. It's really my pleasure to be with you all here today. So just to give some historical background and context, as Jen mentioned, I was formerly the governor's education policy advisor. I had served in that role since March of 2019. And obviously the world certainly turned upside down when COVID hit a year later in March of 2020. From that point on, a lot of my role was really focused on COVID response within the context of K-12 schools, and just wanted to say thank you on the front end for all of the really heroic, difficult, challenging work that you all did with your local school communities during the pandemic. In 2020, in May, we pulled together a council to help develop a return to school plan. We called it the Return to School Advisory Council, which included experts across K-12, as well as from public health, mental health, and community organizations, and worked through the summer to develop what is known as the roadmap, the Return to School Roadmap, which was more than anything a health and safety document to help provide guidance to schools on how to provide in-person, face-to-face instruction while still in the pandemic. We're really proud of the roadmap and think it served as a really useful tool to, especially to school leaders and school board members, on how to confront this very real disease while still providing a great education to students. Fast forward another 4 or 5 months, the governor recognized very quickly that we needed to pivot and begin to really focus on the recovery of students from the toll of the pandemic, not just academically, but from a physical health perspective, a mental health perspective, and just sort of a life trajectory perspective. Things were starting to look brighter with vaccines on the horizon, and we saw more and more schools open their doors for face-to-face in-person instruction. So it was in her 2021 State of the State address that the governor announced that she would be convening another council to create recommendations and guidance that would, again, were focused on recovery from the pandemic rather than a health and safety infection mitigation protocol perspective. We invited almost the exact same members that served on the original council to sit on this new council, which was called the Student Recovery Advisory Council of Michigan. And on February 4th, the governor established the Student Recovery Advisory Council via Executive Order 2021-02, and with a charge to provide recommendations regarding student recovery. So that included academic support for students who experience disrupted learning due to COVID-19, recommendations to address mental and physical wellness for students impacted by COVID-19, special recognition of the additional support that our high school students needed, recognizing they had the least amount of time before they were transitioning out of K-12 and into post-secondary education, how we can best partner with out of school time community-based organizations and families to extend learning outside of the classroom, et cetera. The former chair of the original council was Tanya Allen from the Skillman Foundation. She had taken a new position out of state, and so the governor named a new chair, Mr. Kevin Polston, who is the superintendent of Godfrey Lee Public Schools in Kent County. And then we also added some additional members to the council in order to round out and get some of those perspectives for things like post-secondary transitions and out of school time. The council met between the months of February and May and donated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteer hours to develop the recommendations for the roadmap. We agreed on a collective mission to build clear guidance, including resources and tools that help superintendents and school leaders build comprehensive, evidence-based, equity-driven recovery plans that the community trusts. And before I turn it over to the board members who served on the council, I just wanted to quickly show you the roadmap. Thank you to DeShandria for putting a link in the chat so you can check it out there. But I also wanted to just go through the first couple of pages. Hopefully you can see that. So to get to the website, an easier link to remember is michigan.gov/student recovery. And that will take you to this home page. And then if you look at the actual report itself, I just wanted to make a couple of notes about how it's organized. So there's a letter from the governor at the beginning, thanking the council for their work and kind of giving a preview of what the blueprint is. And I should say the title of the report is the blueprint. So the health and safety document was the roadmap. This is the blueprint. So that's how we distinguish between the two. There is a list of all of the advisory council members, including Mary Guevara, who you'll see or hear from in a moment, and she served on both councils. But then after that, there's another page with all of the additional contributors to the blueprint that served on the various subcommittees. And I'm really proud to say that I worked really closely with Jen to ensure that we had a school board member on each and every single one of our subcommittees to make sure that that perspective was considered. And we had 7 subcommittees total. We provide some data, some baseline data on what the toll of the pandemic was. And then on page 9, this is, I think, just one of the key pages I wanted to share with you. The whole document is focused on helping districts create a comprehensive recovery plan. This is the 10-step process for how you would build the plan. What follows are recommendations that you can then sort of plug and play into your plan. It would be, there is something like 50 recommendations in this document across many, many domains. It would be unrealistic and unwise to try to take every recommendation and put it into your recovery plan. Step 3 provides sort of guidance to districts to really prioritize the most critical challenges. And then from there, you can draw from the evidence-based recommendations that the blueprint provides. These were our guiding principles. So as we developed recommendations, each recommendation was held up against these criteria. The blueprint had to be informed by student voice, support a multi-year approach to recovery, making sure schools had the tools that they needed, still protect the health and safety of students, work within an equity framework, prioritize family and community engagement, provide flexibility, be grounded in evidence, and take a whole child approach. And then the last thing I'll say before I turn it over is there's several sections. We actually collapsed. There was a subcommittee that was focused on physical health, a subcommittee focused on mental health and mental health. We collapsed it into one section focused on wellness. And then this is just an example of how each recommendation is organized. And then for the rest of the document, there is, each page focuses on a goal that a school district could adopt as one of the elements of their comprehensive student recovery plan. So it acknowledges a challenge that schools faced during the pandemic, identifies the root cause, provides an example goal that a district could provide, identifies the high leverage actions that districts could take in order to achieve the goal. And then right next to it are links to supporting evidence, both research that demonstrates the effectiveness of the high leverage action, as well as examples and models that the school could utilize. And then lastly, we try to highlight an in-state example of a school district that had implemented this action so that you can find a local community to reach out to or to model a project around or a goal around. We know that the funding for schools is pretty significant with the ESSER funds, and that there's a great deal of responsibility that schools have to spend that money wisely. Our hope is that this is a tool for districts to utilize when creating not only their action plans, but really their budgets on how they will best use recovery dollars. And if anything, not to sound too crass, but there will be significant reporting requirements that go with those dollars. We hope that this is also a framework that schools can use to help really provide the evidence for why they are spending the money that they are, and can demonstrate compliance. So I'm really proud that I had the opportunity to work alongside the advisory council. I will say literally every word in this document was written by a subcommittee member. We had a facilitator to help organize the process, but they did not provide a single word or language for supporting these recommendations. It was all driven by the subcommittee members, and I am so grateful for them, especially the school board members that served. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Jen, and I will stop sharing my screen, and really wanted you to hear from the school board members about their experiences and maybe how they are planning to use the blueprint in their communities. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jen.
Thank you, Brandy. And we'll hear from the school board members. And then if you have questions for any of them, like you said, just put them in the chat. We'll get them answered. I'm going to ask each of our school board members that joined us to talk a little bit about their experiences on the council, their hopes for the blueprint, as Brandy said, maybe some of the things they're looking to do in their own districts. And we're going to start with Mary.
Thank you, Jen. I'm Mary Jabara. I'm from the Okemos Public Schools District, and I had the pleasure, like Brandy said, of serving on both councils last spring and then again this spring. And what an exciting process to be a part of. It was truly a meeting of the minds, if I can say it in any other way. Everyone on these councils was there for the right reasons. And it was completely student driven, recovery driven, and no one had any other agenda but doing the best work with the best possible outcomes. And I think that was probably the most fulfilling part of being on these teams. I was on the mental health subcommittee for both Blueprint and Roadmap efforts. And during those times, I think what resonated with me was the focus was really about the fact that COVID-19 isn't the only crisis we've ever seen. You know, crisis is not new. It's that COVID-19 is a new crisis. And I think that for many of us, because it's the largest of our lifetime, you know, on this sort of scale, we kind of made it feel like it was the one and only. We didn't know what to do. We don't know where to go. And a lot of the issues that we addressed on the mental health subcommittees were pre-existing issues. You know, what was happening before the pandemic and what's just gotten worse because of it is more of the mindset that we had going in. And I think that that really helped us find deficits, you know, that are existing now and that we've always been dealing with, especially in the mental health realm. You know, we're always saying we need more support in schools. We need more mental health experts and social workers and counselors. And I feel like we have these discussions so often on my own school board, and it's a funding issue or it's a resource issue. And I felt like being a part of these teams gave us the opportunities to not only provide these recommendations that, yes, you're right, you do need more of these people, but when you don't have access to more people, let us give you access to more resources. And everything that you see in the Blueprint has been vetted. There isn't a single recommendation or link to a research article or something that has been done before that wasn't, you know, research driven, equity driven. It's all proven outcomes. And I think that that's kind of a safeguard of the Blueprint. You know, you can take this and you can say, okay, let's address our deficits here within our own district. Let's see what matters the most to us right now as far as what we can change with our new funds or with our existing budget or with our people or with the new people we're going to go out and try to bring in. You know, and then the Blueprint gives you the answers to your questions on so many different fronts. You know, are you looking to create more equity-driven PD for your staff? Are you, here's, you know, more information about it. Are you looking to incorporate, you know, more mental health initiatives for your students of color? Here's more information on what actually works and what you need to make these students feel safe to ask for what they need. You know, here are research evidence-based tools on how to create trust within your communities again, because I feel like trust is a big thing that a lot of us lost over COVID-19 in the K-12 environment altogether. You know, there's a huge disconnect amongst families and school leadership and students and teachers and just everybody. So I value so many different parts of the Blueprint, but on my smaller level of the subcommittee for mental health initiatives, I think that a lot of those non-concrete necessities are sometimes hard to put into, you know, actual, I need this and it costs this much and this is what we're going to do. And the Blueprint really helps you identify what those resources are and how to create them within your own district. And I hope that it is helpful for everyone because it's really something powerful and unique, and I'm really proud of this work. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mary. We're going to go to Holly.
Good afternoon. I'm Holly Spencer. I'm on Elk Rapids Schools Board, and I served on the Family and Community Engagement Subcommittee. And we were focused on a couple of issues, one being the relationships between the schools and communities and families. And I was very excited to be on this committee because in my own district, we see that all the time, that it really is tied to student success, is families' engagement in their education. And the other thing we focused on was after school, summer programming and access to that for students. And what I like about the blueprint is it gives resources. So maybe in your community, you don't think that those things are available, but it gives resources for what's working in other communities or other partners that you can work with to bring those kind of programs into your community. I'm not sure. Let me see. So we worked together to try to bring in different programs. And one of the people on our committee was Ridgway White for Mott Foundation. And he had a tremendous amount of ideas and different programs that they've pulled together. And I know from a small district in Northern Michigan, being able to leverage some of those relationships is going to be very helpful. So I think as you go through the blueprint and you're looking at each area and each topic that you can choose, the high leverage actions, when you're looking at the other districts, you can go in and really pull from their experiences. And I think that's really been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Go to Jan.
Good morning. I would also reiterate what the other speakers have said about the experience of participating. It was so well organized. The work was rigorous, but laid out so well, and I think we came up with some really good recommendations. And I live in the Upper Peninsula, so obviously my situation looks very different than others as a school board member, and with our students' attendance at school. We've basically been in school all year, but have also had those students that have been learning remotely. So, you know, we've dealt with some of the issues. But I think that, like I was on the particular subcommittee that we looked at students who are fully disengaged from school. And there were really 4 subcommittees under academics. First of all, the tier 1 students who may have gaps due to unfinished academic learning. And then those students that have significant unfinished academic learning, the tier 2 and 3 students. And then the group that I participated in, students who are fully disengaged from school and professional knowledge and training. And I think really when you look at the blueprint, and certainly this was addressed before, but looking at the root causes and the goals, et cetera, and the high leverage actions, that I just sort of like to go through those in particular in relationship to those students that are not engaged. Obviously, there were a lot of barriers to attendance caused or exacerbated by the disruptions to in-person instruction. And I was reading an article that was, and it's actually referred to in terms of our research, that, for example, connectivity issues were a major consideration. And this one student, that he received his fine, this was in the state of Wisconsin, which is actually closer to me than for example, downstate, but referred to the fine that he had been received for his truancy, but he didn't have connectivity. And, you know, so I think looking at some of those issues, homelessness, really, when you look at the homeless situation, job loss, mental health, we've referred to some of these things being so overlapping in many of the groups that we worked on. Trauma, multiple educational modalities. I know even here in Norway, it's like, okay, during that period of time from November to December, well, okay, we're quickly pivoting and those multiple educational modalities. So we really wanted to look at how do we re-engage those disengaged students. And it's a 1 to 3 year plan in terms of pre-pandemic attendance policies and measures. Apparently an estimated 62,000 students were missing this fall statewide in Michigan. It's pretty incredible. So some of the things we talked about, and really it was important for me to learn about these things and our school board, to really look at comprehensive tracking systems that would identify the disengaged students. But more importantly, I think we do those, but do we pay attention to the data? Do we use the data really to identify those students that are chronically absent, which is missing at least 10% of the school days per year, or roughly 2 absences per month, and through early warning systems, and then tracking chronic absences obviously should occur on a rolling basis throughout the school year, and it should be real time disaggregated by student subgroups. So the key is really to use that collected data to monitor attendance and proactively intervene when students show early signs of falling off track. In Norway, we did hire someone on a part-time basis to intervene with our students that were learning remotely, even though primarily most of our students were doing in person, and really was able to connect with those students. So the other thing, and I really think this is important, is engaging in intentional outreach to families and students with text messages, phone calls, and home visits, but that strategy needs to be coordinated, consistent, planned, and obviously mindful of those families whose first language is not English. But the suggestion is really to create written scripts, and that be a consistent, intentional script that all are using, that's asset-based, not deficit-based, and saying things like, we really miss the child, and letting students know that they matter, they're missed, and support is available. And then also taking steps to really help parents, students, and school staff understand the importance of attending school. And in some of the supporting evidence actually outlines many different plans. The one I really liked was the Phoenix, Arizona plan. The other thing is, and in my area, we're not doing a very good job of this. I think we're starting, but is to coordinate and collaborate with community agencies. What is the systemic means to assess the availability of evidence-based wraparound supports and two-way data for sharing? So partnering with faith-based organizations, community groups and partners, social service agencies, civic groups, neighborhood groups, and cultural associations to identify what's the status of those families that have really fallen off the radar. And then personalized support to help students to re-engage academically and socially and emotionally. And securing the support of a trusting, caring adult. Connecting the curriculum and schoolwork to topics that are meaningful and relevant to students' lives and interest, and monitoring growth continually and adjusting interventions as needed. So I was really proud of the work that our subcommittee did and how we focused on our mission at every meeting. We revisited our ground rules and how well we were able to cooperate together and that's been mentioned by many of the groups, but obviously the hope is that schools will use this, and realizing that one size doesn't fit all, and it's based on your individualized experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And finally, we're going to go to Betty.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Technical difficulties. I apologize if the 3-year-old gets a little noisy too long. I really appreciated being on the commission. I was on post-secondary transition, and it was astounding to me at first when they put out the numbers of the amount of students who had not entered a community college or a college of some sort for education beyond high school. And I think, and I think our group did a really good job of listening to the experts and finding out how we could put together, hopefully, a plan to help our schools, help those kids from the last 2 years, and get into, at least start the process. And, the biggest part of that, I think, was changing the language that's used to make it relevant to the parents and others in the community. That, we're investing in the future. It's not just we're doing it now just to get kids into college. We're investing in the future for them and future generations. And so it was really, really eye-opening. And, one of the things that we had to really bring out was, how do we get to these kids? And part of that is getting to them where they live. And it may not necessarily be in the district where they're going to school, because we have, our school has a large, not only transient population, but a lot of school choice population. And so reaching them after they get out of school and on weekends, and getting the importance and the relevance out there to parents was one of the things that we talked about a lot. Not just getting it to the kids and what can we do in the high school and what can we do in the college, but also where is it that we're going to meet them and get this information to them and get the FAFSAs filled out and get them enrolled and start them on their way. So, this one's too young to worry about that yet.
Thank you, Betty. So one of the first questions that came up, I think, is probably for you, Brandy, but I believe there were students on the council. Were there students on each subcommittee?
That's a great question. So there were, yes, there was a permanent member, student member that participated on both councils, Dominic Gonzalez, who's a senior in Detroit Public Schools Community District. There was not a student on each subcommittee. However, that is how we grounded the very first meeting of the advisory council. So when we reconvened everyone to participate on this new Student Recovery Advisory Council, we asked all of the school-based members, like the principals and the superintendents and the teachers, to identify a student to participate in that first panel. And so we spent our entire first meeting listening to what students had faced during the pandemic, what were their challenges, what were their bright spots, and then we had the opportunity to really interview them and ask them questions if they felt that they had fallen off track academically, or again, in terms of that post-secondary trajectory that Betty was just talking about, how, what they experienced, what their peers and friends or siblings experienced, et cetera. So then the rest of the meetings of the advisory council were grounded in that initial student listening session. I think you're on mute, Jen.
So there's a lot here in this blueprint. How many of these challenges do you think school districts should look at, and what's the best way for them to decide what the best ones to focus on are? And I'll open this up to any of you that did work on this.
I defer to the board members as someone that works, with that capacity day in and day out.
Go ahead, Mary.
I think as a school board leader, I would recommend that each district look at their strategic plan, look at their mission, look at their deficits pre-pandemic and what they look like now, and then use the blueprint as more of a glossary, and kind of go through and really target what you're looking to do, what you need, and use it that way. I wouldn't suggest taking the blueprint and saying, let's implement as much of this as we can, because that feels so overwhelming to me. I would really make it personal and make it driven based on what your district's needs are and what your strategic plan dictates, and what feels best for your students and your community and your staff at this point, rather than everything that the blueprint can offer you, because I don't think that that's even achievable. It would just be overwhelming in so many ways.
And I think from our district perspective, I think student wellness is one that I think probably everybody needs to focus on, because before we can really get to the academics or to anything else, we need to make sure that our students are ready to learn and have the things that they need to have.
I do think that there is, though, an overlap in each of the groups in terms of, for example, emotional, social learning, etc. But that exactly what Mary said in terms of really looking at the blueprint through the lens of what are the local challenges, evidence, currently, and working from there. I really would suggest, however, that that there be a student recovery committee that's really representative of your community, and that's also recommended in the blueprint. They have a pretty, I thought it was a very helpful, and Holly, you showed that in the beginning, or Brandy, you showed it in the beginning, those steps that I think can be very helpful in terms of a local and how they look at the various goals, etc.
Right, and the advisory council, I believe, is ongoing until the end of this calendar year, if I'm correct. And if so, what will they be doing next?
So legally, it exists through the end of the calendar year. So the executive order allows for the advisory council to continue to be appointees of the governor through December 31st. But at this point, I would say that other than exactly what we're doing right now, briefings about the blueprint to interested groups, the council's no longer meeting on a regular basis because we fulfilled the original charge that was in the executive order, which was to develop the recommendations. And so I think that the council is on standby should the governor have a new task or a new charge for them to complete. I will say we've spoken with organizations like MAISA, we've spoken with Launch Michigan about potential ways to sort of plug in advisory council members to their existing offerings around things like professional development. And so I think that the advisory council members are ready and willing to help should there be another charge given to them.
What do you envision as the coordinated and collaborative engagement with community agencies? What does that look like, and what type of wraparound support would be included? who spoke to that? Holly, was that your committee that talked about community engagement?
It was, yeah. And I think that the community agencies, I think, is going to differ based on what your location is and what your district looks like. In the blueprint, there's some links to resources that kind of point to different agencies and community partners across the state. So I would open those links up and look in there if you're looking for your district specifically.
Jan, did you have any thoughts on that? I think you mentioned it a little bit.
Holly did a really good job, but I think that really it is that whole idea of looking at your community and becoming aware. And also another thing that was mentioned is professional development for school staff in terms of what support is needed and the various agencies, et cetera, and then really working on that script I was talking about as people are approached, that it's a consistent same message in each case. So really, figuring out within your own community, and that certainly looks different in different places.
One that we specifically looked at was communities in schools, and that helps provide the wraparound services.
One of the topics in the report that we didn't talk about was the school climate section. And I know that none of you served on that subcommittee, but wondered, Brandy or others, is there anything you want to highlight from that part of the report?
I'll just, and I'll say that the subcommittee that worked on this was also the subcommittee that developed the mental health and social emotional learning recommendations. I think that there was acknowledgement that obviously in 2020, we had a global health emergency, but that wasn't the only significant event that happened in 2020. This country also had a huge racial awakening, and that students, particularly students of color, were traumatized not just by the pandemic, but by these national events related to racism and pursuit of social justice. And so I will just say that that was the context for developing those recommendations, just part, again, acknowledging a realistic assessment of what students' well-being is like as they are coming back from being, largely learning remotely. So yeah, I'll just say that that was the context.
I can speak to that a little bit. We had, in my mental health subcommittee, we also focused a lot on racial trauma. And I think that that's part of what Brandy's talking about. And for a few of our meetings, we had students come in and talk about their experiences. And they were students of color who, explained that they were already feeling behind their counterparts. They were already having struggles that they can't voice because they're not sure why they're having them. One girl just broke my heart and she said, "I don't understand why I have to tell you that I matter. No other population of people have to say that they matter." She goes, and people like me in my age group, my friends, don't understand why we have to remind people that just because we're Black doesn't mean that we don't matter. And I thought, oh my goodness, that this is such a deep-rooted systemic issue that we put big words on, but we need to just ask these students, what can we do to help you? How can we make you feel safe enough and trust us enough to let us in and let us make changes that will make you feel safe, that will make you feel valued, that will make you know that you matter. And, you know, they talk about just giving them the space, giving them the opportunity, giving them, you know, the platform, I think, to just talk about how they feel. One student suggested that we put up a board in a hallway where they could just post sticky notes of, you know, things that they felt they needed or that they wanted to say, or that they didn't feel comfortable with saying out loud in a group maybe, and they could just write on a sticky note and post it on the wall. And then at the end of the day, the mental health team, whether they're social workers or nurses or counselors, just come and collect those every day. You know, or there's a drop box in the office or in the hallway where they can just put anonymous little notes of how they're feeling or what their needs are, that then can be addressed on a more school-wide level, not calling anybody out, not making anyone feel insecure or on the spot. And I think that it's really just important to remember that these big initiatives don't always reach the targeted audience. And when we are dealing with things on a local level, we have such a greater opportunity to make sure that those things happen, especially in individual schools or age groups. And I found so much more information by listening to the students on those few opportunities we had than in our big collective groups of adults trying to figure out what to do for them. So when you do form your initiatives and you do look to make changes, I would encourage you to always have those student voices at the table, because they're so valuable and they're so needed to move forward in the right way.
And so really, Mary, what you're saying is that the strategies are designed with students, not for students. That's so important. I was also going to mention that I think there's an important part of the blueprint that we don't really talk about much, but in addition to the various subgroups and their recommendations, are policy recommendations too. And I think they're very important in terms of, you know, that certain things have to happen for many of these things to be done. So that's the
actually my
last
next
section.
question. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Perfect segue into my next question was about that last section, the policy recommendations. There's 4 pretty big policy recommendations there. But can you talk a little bit about the hope behind those policy recommendations? Because obviously we need legislative action for that. We can't just do that on our own. But why these 4 are so important?
Yeah, I'll talk about them, what they are, and then maybe I'll answer the first part and maybe the board members can answer the second part. So the recommendations were the audience, unlike, so 90% of the blueprint is really designed for school leaders and school board members to develop their plans. The very last section are policy recommendations directed at state policymakers, including the governor and legislators. And they are really more about systemic changes that can be made that would best enable schools to be best positioned to be successful with their plans. And so the recommendations obviously focus on first funding, so both adequate and equitable funding, largely drawing on the SFRC, as well as the sort of stable funding, recognizing that pupil accounting for the next couple of years may provide some pretty large fluctuation in membership and can make it hard to make plans for in terms of a comprehensive student recovery plan. The document also made recommendations for to start innovation zones where districts that agreed to being held accountable for achieving certain outcomes were freed from some of the more compliance-y elements of state law. And then the last one was to fund universal preschool for 4-year-olds in Michigan to help them get off to a great start. So there was pretty universal agreement among the advisory council members on those policy recommendations.
Any thoughts from our board members? Well, we are getting close to 1 o'clock. Does anybody have any final thoughts or any final questions to put in the chat? But do any of our board members or Brandy, do you have any final thoughts about that you want to share with everyone?
No, just what I started with again. I can't even begin to imagine what life was like to be a locally elected school board member during these last 2 school years. I, for the first time ever, was a parent of a child enrolled in public schools. And so I, as a engaged parent, sat in on those 5-6 hour long, really painful board meetings. And I just know how challenging and difficult and emotional it was to make these decisions. So again, I just wanted to say thank you, and to really encourage all of you to utilize the blueprint as a tool for developing your plans moving forward. And thanks to Jen and MASB for inviting me to participate.
Thanks for being here, Brandy. Holly, Mary, Jan, or Betty? All right, well, thank you to our 4 board members, and thank you for the work you did on the council. I really do appreciate Brandy reached out at the beginning to make sure we had a board member on every single subcommittee, and we really appreciated that, and just the acknowledgement that the board members are a valuable voice. And so we wanted to get that on all the committees. So I appreciate the 4 of you that could join us today. There were other board members on the list or on the subcommittees. You'll find their names in the acknowledgements. I believe there were 3 more, if I remember right. So we really appreciate the time that you have given to put forth this blueprint. And Brandy, for your work with the governor's office, with this council. And as always with us, we always appreciate hearing from you on these as well. So thank you all for joining us today. This recording will be available later this week for anyone you'd like to share it with. And if you have questions going forward about the blueprint, I'm sure the board members that were here today would be happy to help. But you can certainly reach out to MASB as well, and we will track things down for you. Have a great day, and we will talk to you all soon.